All right, let's get started. So in today's nonprofit and business environment, they have nonprofits and businesses have a unique opportunity to work together to create real lasting change while also advancing their own goals. Today, I am totally thrilled to be joined by Dan Drucker, founder of Philanthropy Fuel. We will be discussing an important topic for both the nonprofit and for-profit sector, how mission and market can align and drive impact, build stronger partnerships, and fuel long-term success. So first of all, thank you, Dan, for being part of this.
Oh, thanks, Ken. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to the conversation for a while now.
So maybe you can start by talking a little bit about how Philanthropy Fuel works and what inspired you to launch it.
So I spent about 35 years in corporate B2B sales and marketing. The last 10 or 12, I was leading the sales and marketing team for a division of Canon throughout the US and had a great run there, but retired from that in January of 2024. It was just time to move on. And besides doing things that I wanted to do in retirement, spend more time with family, volunteering, photography, travel, all that good stuff, I knew I wanted to start something, but I'll be honest with you. Up to that point, I thought the something I started would be in, sales coaching, sales leadership consulting, that kind of thing, kind of space I lived in. But as I sat down to lay it out, I just kind of felt like, all right, I want to do something different. I want to get involved in something where I'm helping people that are helping other people. And so with a little bit of push from my sister, who spent most of her career in nonprofit, I started to realize there's a lot of parallels between corporate B2B when done the right way and nonprofit, especially fundraising and development when done the right way, in terms of building relationships, asking questions, taking the long view. So I think it was March of 2024, I just started diving in. I started networking on LinkedIn with kind of the thought leaders in the nonprofit sector, following them, engaging their content, listening to podcasts, jumping on, webinars like this, being active in the chat, and just networking like a maniac, and then taking those conversations offline just to learn what was important to the sector. And it kind of confirmed that there were a lot of parallels. So I launched Philanthropy Fuel in August of 2024, with really the offering was kind of a workshop to help fundraising and development teams learn just those handful of business development skills that I knew were important in B2B that would carry over well into fundraising. But what I learned getting into the second half of 2024 and what I kind of started getting involved with, and it started with just helping a couple of international nonprofits pro bono, just a couple of people that I had met that were struggling with sustainability, which I know is one of the topics for today, and weren't sure where next quarter's funding was going to come from. They were looking to establish partnerships with businesses here in the US. So I said, I knew nothing about it, but let me take a shot. It's what I did in my career, right? Doing the research, finding the right people, connecting with them on a message that has value to them, and trying to set up dialogue. And that's what I did for these two organizations. And, some with success, some not, but got some high level meetings and decided this was something that was sorely missing, or at least lacking from the nonprofit space in terms of how they approached corporate and business partnerships. So I kind of morphed my services towards the end of 2024 and heading into this year, really focused on helping small and mid-sized nonprofits build better partnerships with both local and national businesses. So that's where we are today.
I was going to say, I think that's super important, not just from the nonprofit side, but also from the business side. When you think about business, you think about the fact that you're looking at social responsibility, and businesses need to give back to the community to become kind of more of a business imperative in terms of what's going on. Also with staff and retaining staff, especially Gen Z, who are more socially oriented and everything else. So it's not no longer just a nice to have sort of thing, but it's almost something that's kind of super important. How do you kind of look at the business side of things here and not just the nonprofit side, and kind of looking at how they need to be part of these types of partnerships also?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it with the generations. I think, what I certainly will call the younger generations. Obviously, for some of the people in the audience, it might be their generations. But, you talk about millennials and Gen Zs. The world's changing. They are demanding that the businesses that they work for, and quite frankly, the businesses that they buy from, you know, have a real social impact focus, not just marketing spin, not just PR spin, not just putting out, a tweet or a LinkedIn post on Martin Luther King Day or something like that, but really focus on social good. And if you're a business, you're in a fight for talent, right? You're in a fight to attract, retain, and motivate talent. And I think that's made a lot of businesses really relook at what philanthropy and social good was all about. I think the other part is you're seeing the rise of social enterprises, which are some of my favorite people. And I've had the fortune to work with a couple and interact with a few founders. And, they bring the best of both worlds. So they're for profit, but they're leading with a cause. The cause comes first. They get innovative. They're using technology. And I think that model, I believe I read somewhere like 75 or 80% of the social enterprises in the US, grew year over year from 23 to 24. Well, that's a pretty strong statement. And I think corporations are taking notice of that. And also, again, the generations we talked about, they're flocking to those kind of organizations. So I think for businesses, it's going to be a way to survive. But I think the smart ones can, they're also realizing, when I was in the corporate world, when we talked about donations, it was a lot, or supporting nonprofits, partnerships, it was really about PR and tax deductions. If we're gonna budget $1 million to go towards charitable causes, we know that's going to save us 300,000 in taxes or 200. You would know that a lot better than I know. Whatever the number is, right? It's a big number, and that was it. Now, if you're a business, you start to realize that if employee retention is important, nonprofits can help. If customer growth is a target, you know, nonprofit partnerships can help. If brand recognition is important to you, nonprofits can help. If being more ingrained in the communities that you exist in are more important, nonprofits can help. So these now you're looking at this as a true business partnership, not just a donation, not just a sponsorship of a golf outing or buying a table at a gala. Now it's a real business to business partnership. And I think that bodes well for both sides going forward.
How are you kind of working with both sides to kind of get those discussions happening? Because again, I still see the nonprofit sector, going out there and saying, "Hey, will you sponsor my golf outing or whatever?" And
Yep.
there are deeper relationships that can be made, and there's a lot more money that can be made through those deeper relationships.
There's no question about it. I think it's difficult. I don't want anybody to think this is easy and you can just, pick up the phone and call and you got yourself a partnership. This is built over time. One of the things you mentioned is on the nonprofit side, there needs to be a mindset shift. So when I sit down with a client, I say, we got it. Listen, you're having a golf outing, absolutely. Get somebody to sponsor, right? You're having a gala, get sponsors, but that's not a partnership. That's a sponsorship. So we talk a lot about strategy. What do you want to accomplish long term? And then you start looking about, if you're the nonprofit, what do you offer? Forget about what you need. Don't talk about what you need. Don't talk about, if you're a university, we need a new lab, we need a new library. Talk about what the impact is going to be, plus what you offer a corporation, whether it's, volunteerism, active advocacy, employee motivation, growth, retention, and build off of that. So what I do with my clients is we sit down, we look at all that, and we start to identify who would be a good partner. And then I use various tools, whether it's AI, whatever it is, LinkedIn, and I'm searching for the companies that match that one value spot, that's really important to them. And then do further research. Who are the people within those companies that have spoken out about this type of cause, this type of partnership? Maybe they've just spoken out. Maybe it's an HR person that's talked a lot about employee engagement. Maybe it's the marketing person that's talked a lot about, needing to raise the level of their brand recognition. And then you craft some really customized messaging to reach out. And your whole idea is, hey, can we just have a conversation? We think there may be an ability to raise the mission of both organizations at the same rate if we can get together. So I think that's the key. But I still find even with my clients, they kind of fall back into, geez, if we could just get, $5,000 for this campaign or this outing or this event, we'd be great. I also encourage them to be creative. It doesn't just have to be money. There's advocacy, there's volunteerism, and there's different types of volunteerism. There's skills-based volunteering. There's donations of goods and services. There's earned revenue models. So I think I encourage my clients and others to just be creative when you're approaching these corporations because they want creative business partners, not just someone who's just going to take a check.
So are you seeing kind of the nonprofit sector driving this discussion, driving this trend, driving this, or are you seeing it coming from both directions where businesses are also looking at this and looking to find the nonprofit partner they want to partner with?
So I'd say the nonprofits recognize it as a need with everything going on today, the need to diversify funding with what's going on with federal grants and just the competition. They're still not there in terms of pushing the conversation the right way. They still struggle with it. I think you see a lot of times in nonprofit, they come at a lot of relationships and with a kind of what I'll call a deficit mindset. Oh, thank you for that $10, which of course you should say thank you, but it's like it's so grateful for that versus, hey, we're an equal in this partnership. So I think that is going to be something that's going to take a while to shake. I've had very wonderful conversations with some CSR officers, corporate social responsibility officers at some major, Fortune 500 companies, just off the cuff to see what was on their initiatives were for this year, next year, and those are really encouraging. I think so. I actually see, believe it or not, I think the businesses are a little bit further ahead than the nonprofits in looking at how can they build this kind of ecosystem where you've got businesses, you've got nonprofits, you've got social enterprises, you've got communities all working together to kind of push the social good envelope.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're seeing a little bit more on the business side. We've been trying to talk more to the nonprofits about it. Not every peg is a round peg,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, it's kind of the approach the nonprofit sector has been taking. And if you kind of just look at things different and look to see how you can develop those deeper partnerships, they're definitely better. So, what do you see, or what have you seen as a successful partnership? What does one of those look like?
So like any partnership, it's got to be co-created, right? It's got to be built together. It's not a one size fits all. Like you said, it's not everything's a round peg. And I think what has to happen first from both organizations, and they should be doing this all the time, but is some heavy introspection. I'm a big believer in kind of the Venn diagram, and you're looking for that overlap, right? And that overlap could come in so many different ways. Maybe both the business and the nonprofit are trying to reach the same audience. Maybe you're talking about the same cause. Maybe there's a link between the employees and volunteerism. You're doing some heavy introspection to figure out what's important to you, and that's what I help my clients do. And I know a lot of businesses have started to do that and are very public about these are the causes, this is what we want to do, this is what we want to accomplish, this is what we want employees to enjoy, this is what we want all our stakeholders to know about us. And then once you've done the introspection, now it's having those conversations and figure out where that overlap is, and then sit down and build a business plan around that overlap and get creative. Again, it's not just about donations. Where does volunteerism play in? Where does advocacy play in? Could you have some kind of earned revenue model where you're actually selling something to generate revenue that then goes towards the cause? Is there cause marketing you can do together? Are there joint development of programs you could do together? If I'm thinking of like a pharmaceutical and then a nonprofit that's looking for a cure for some kind of disease or serving a certain, population that's afflicted with something. There's a lot that can be done. So I think these are bigger partnerships than just, hey, we need this money. Okay, here's the money. Let's do a LinkedIn post.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the joint marketing, joint press
Yeah,
releases, social media, all of that stuff that kind
absolutely.
of plays well into all of this stuff.
Yeah, because you think about, listen, nonprofits tend to have the scarcity mindset, but they also do have scarcity. It's not just the mindset, right? They don't have a ton of resources. And then you look at businesses, their marketing engine, their PR engine, that's what you want to use for advocacy, for like I said, joint press releases. And it's really a partnership. And I encourage nonprofits to look at it as a multi-year event, not just a singular event, not just for a singular campaign. It's a multi-year event that can really benefit both parties. And both parties should be raising their mission at the same rate. Anytime you have one that's hitting their goals way quicker than the other one, you've got somebody at a deficit, and that tends to stall a partnership.
So what are some of the, I guess, key ingredients that make these collaborations work?
I think both parties need to talk about what value they bring. First of all, like any partnership, everything's got to be laid out because one of the things I think nonprofits might struggle with is resources, and they may commit to something that they can't handle, and then the corporation starts driving it and kind of takes over. So I think, the key ingredients are understanding what that intersecting value is. The key ingredients are the who's doing what. Let's lay this out on paper. Who's responsible for what? What do we hope to get out of it? What kind of PR are we doing? Who's getting credit for what? Where are the different funds going? If decisions need to be made, what's the decision tree? Who's making the decision? And then the other part of it is, where does this thing grow? So you're going to start off probably small and with one, focusing on one thing. But again, where else can you take this? And I think it's exciting. I mean, we've had conversations with corporations, financial organizations, top five financial organizations about doing financial literacy training for underfunded populations that one of my clients represents. We've had conversations with cosmetic companies to provide you know goods and goods in a bag for again population at a hospital that I was working with. So you get a lot of different creative ideas, and I think that creativity's got to be come to the table, just like it would if you were in a meeting, with a company looking, for profit and for profit to do some kind of partnership together. You're laying everything out, you're looking at measurable goals, you're constantly communication, but you got to really dictate who's doing what kind of feedback are they getting, what's the plan going forward. Otherwise, you just kind of get lost up in the shuffle.
Do you have any examples or samples of some really good partnerships that you look at and you kind of point at and say those are the types of partnerships we're trying to create here?
Yeah, I mean, there's been partnerships. I'm just trying to think kind of even in locally. There's been some great partnerships with some of the uh, what is it? There were some department stores, here on Long Island that have given, a ton of, clothing, things like that with charities that are focused on kids and homelessness and things like that and donating that clothing. But again, it's more than just a donation. They get their employees involved in volunteering. They're getting advocacy out there together, joint releases. So I think those are the kinds of things that are working really well. I've seen, on the food side, I've seen nonprofits working with other nonprofits like Island Harvest, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah. Island Harvest has a one of their board members, Alero, which is a company that makes food distribute gloves, when you go
Yep.
to the salad bar and stuff. And they donate a meal for every case of gloves that they sell to Island Harvest. So that's kind of a good
Yeah.
partnership
You
because
see
again,
that?
it's the food industry. They're big on the food industry, and so
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
kind
And
of
I see Island Harvest helping other nonprofits, but then a corporate sponsor stepping in to fund that help. And it's not just the food distribution, they also do food education, especially for children stuff. So I've seen a lot of good ones, and I think kind of the sky's the limit.
so. I guess part of the process of going through this is really looking at a business and a nonprofit that have common goals, common values, and all that stuff. Um, you know, how can a nonprofit, I know you said you go through and you do some research and you try to find, but how can a nonprofit approach a business? What's the best way to approach a business that they've maybe pre-identified as a potential good partner for them?
Yeah, you got to do the research. So it definitely, I think a lot of the thing is the questions you ask up front, but you got to do the research. And I've taken some people and I did a workshop, for the nonprofit resource hub where, this was just a small part of it. But again, how do you do that smart research? And what you're looking for is when you've identified what's going to be important for you and a corporate partner and what value you think you may provide to them. Again, some of the things we already talked about, like employee engagement or specifically the cause, that's how you want to do your research. And what I love about AI, and it's certainly not the end all beat all to everything, but it kind of is a good level setter for small and mid-sized nonprofits to be able to do some pretty intense research that in the past they would have needed big staffs like the large global nonprofits have, and they don't, they obviously don't have that, but now you can. And I kind of walk them through, all right, let's do a search, based on whatever geography we're looking at, what your cause is, what are related causes, and let's see, and what are the other things. And then I want to get a list of potential targets, and this is just an early exercise, but potential targets that have supported causes like yours in the past, that have examples of other nonprofit partnerships they've done in the past, that have examples of employee engagement initiatives that they've done through volunteering or whatever it might be. And then let's dig up through AI all the press releases, the web, the website mentions, the social media posts, and that's the stuff, there's no shortcut there. Then you read through that, and what you're really looking for is not just a match in the values, you're looking for who's talking about it within this business. Who's kind of the mouthpiece, and it might be a CSR officer, it could be a chief marketing officer. Um, people are making up a lot of names like social impact lead or director and things like that. So you're looking for those people, and then I kind of move over to LinkedIn, and I'm doing a lot of research in terms of, are they still there? Are they the right person? And then it's some very very customized, sharp outreach, whether that's email, whether that's LinkedIn direct message, whether that's cold calling, based on what they've already done. So it's not about you, the nonprofit. It's, hey, Ken, I noticed that, you've got a long history of working with, XYZ cause out on Long Island, and doing this, that, and the other thing. Would love to talk to you about what we're doing here. Boom, boom, boom. Just looking to have a quick dialogue. You open for that and keep it simple, because the whole idea is just to start the dialogue. And you find a lot of them, if it hits in their niche, which is both the cause and what they're trying to accomplish that year, whether it's customers or employees or brand, if you hit on the right things, they won't say, yeah, I'll have a 20-minute conversation with an executive director or a founder or the, director of, development.
You talked about kind of getting to a point where you're looking at equalization of values or value in the relationship where both sides are getting some sort of equal level of value. How do you determine that value? How do you determine what you need to bring to the table and what your expectations are from the other side? Because I guess for most nonprofits, what they're looking for is they're looking, as you said, they're looking for money. That's pretty much the biggest driving force that they want. They're looking for maybe in-kind donations, whether it be food or clothing, as you've discussed, maybe some skills or volunteer labor. So there are different kind of components. How do you kind of look at that and try to even out the scales in terms of what that relationship should look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's you almost workshop it. You sit down and you kind of lay it all out. But you're right, you hit on the main components for the nonprofit. And you got to decide what's important to you. And then from the business standpoint, what I love is I think it's really easy these days to come up with the real ROI of like social impact partnerships. Because if you think about it, in the past, all right, you had the tax deduction, and that still exists. And PR, which is kind of can be a little bit fuzzier. But today, if employee engagement is your thing, there's not a CFO and a head human resources officer out there that couldn't tell you what's the cost of replacing one employee. What does that mean to their organization? Which doesn't even take into account, lost bonds with clients and prospects and lost legacy knowledge. But they know that number. And if you're a CEO or a CFO, you know the number cold of what it costs you when you lose a big client. And the same thing with a marketing officer for brand recognition. If you can raise your rating 3 points, 4 points, 5 points, they know exactly what that means in dollars and cents. So the ROI measures for the businesses are really way more straightforward when they were in the past, because again, we're talking more than just, cutting a check. And when you arm them with that material, they can go right to their leadership and say, this is the kind of partnership we're building. In terms of making sure it's equal value, that's where the questions of each other really come out as important. Understanding what's the number one for both sides. So if for the nonprofit, the biggest thing is they need money, and for the business, the biggest thing is right now they need brand recognition. Okay, let's build a program around that. If the biggest thing for the nonprofit down the road is they need more volunteers because they want to grow their programs, and for the nonprofit, it's employee engagement, perfect. That's a perfect match. Let's build the second part of the program around that. So I think you build it based on those values equaling out. And in that way, nobody's kind of getting more out of the partnership than the other. I mean, it's never going to be a perfect match, but you try to keep it as even as you can.
Are you finding that um, businesses are more open to this discussion now than they were in the past? I still find that this, for many businesses, actually for many nonprofits, this is still a foreign topic. Are you finding that, once you start broaching this subject, it's something that people are willing to listen to, or people get excited and are interested in hearing more about?
I'd say yes, no, and maybe. I think I've had various levels of success and failure in trying to do this, and certainly got
Mhm.
ghosted a ton of times. I think the intent is there, and again, it's being driven by employees. It's still a little foreign to a lot of businesses who are still used to the old, we'll make a donation, we'll get a tax deduction, we'll get some PR and do a joint press release. Um, and even though they say they want to evolve, they're not quite sure how to do it yet. You also get those that do have a pretty good program in place, but it's very focused. Like we're just supporting X and Y, and that's it, and here's how we're doing it. And so anything outside that, they're not really going to be up for discussion. And like I said, the nonprofits, while yeah, they know this is probably an area they need to get into, they're not sure how to approach it, and they fall back. Ken, they fall back on the, just trying to get a sponsorship for an event or a campaign. So while I think the intent is there more than it was in the past, I still think it's a struggle. I do. And then, you throw in economic factors and everything going on with regulations and everything, and a lot of people are just taking a wait and see approach.
So you say that in some of the businesses that you've spoken to, or businesses are starting to better realize what the return on investment of social impact relationships is. Um, how do they, or how are you seeing them going through those types of calculations? How do you kind of leverage that in that nonprofit or that initial nonprofit discussion and everything else?
Yeah, I think you have to leverage that. I think, it depends on how advanced the business is or the corporation is. If they've really looked into this from a CSR standpoint and know that, let's just take employee retention, then they've got goals in mind. That's part of their plan above and beyond any partnerships with nonprofit. They may have a plan of we need to increase employee retention by 10% over the next 3 years. So that's the stuff you have to dig into. Again, that's not going to come all through nonprofit partnerships. But if you can show them how you can impact that positively, even if it's only 2% of that 10%, well, now you've excited them because they've got goals. You know how it works in the corporate world. They've got goals, they've got bonuses, they've got, career desires in terms of to make this work. So they're going to listen, and so if anytime you can hit on one of their goals and be able to contribute to it, they're going to listen. And that's how nonprofits need to approach this. They're just not very good at it yet. They're still, again, falling back on we need a donation versus we can help you get where you need to get once you've asked them the questions of where that is. So I
I
do
think
think the ROI is important, but both sides need to figure out how to talk about it.
I was going to say one of the things that we see is nonprofits have a difficult time understanding or documenting or recording or calculating their own impact. Now you're asking them to calculate the impact that a relationship is going to have on one of their partners. How easy is that? Where do they get that information from in order to be able to bring realistic information to the table so that, it's not some like inflated sort of picture?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's something, that nonprofits have and will continue to struggle with. And you're right, sometimes they have problems even getting across their own impact. So I think you're going to rely a little bit more on the business to do that. So the business is the one that says, just using my example from before, we want to increase employee retention by 10% over 3 years. And you, the nonprofit partnership, you're going to contribute to that. So now what programs do we need to put in place? Well, the nonprofit can absolutely help with that, with volunteering, advocacy, what motivates people, right? What motivates their employees? They work together on that. The measurement is probably coming from the business side. Okay, we finished the year of this partnership, and plus other initiatives we've done, we actually saw in year one, employee retention has gone up by 2.8%. So, we're in good shape. We're a little bit behind. So I think the onus, the nonprofit has to feed them the data, but I think the onus is probably going to stay with the business to really measure the ROI of some of these impacts. Because I don't think the nonprofits all have that kind of wherewithal to do it.
Right. Okay. I mean, we've talked about why this works and everything else. What sort of mistakes, where have you seen these types of relationships fall flat on their face, and um, what should organizations kind of do to prevent, or what can organizations do to try to prevent some
Yep.
of this from happening?
I think the main mistake, I know there's both sides. So the main mistake I think you see from the nonprofit side is, and I talked about it before, leading with need. We need this. We need a new library. We need a new research lab. We need, whatever it is, new equipment. And people, I don't want to say people don't care, but they know that stuff, right? They know if you're a university that you need a library, you need new equipment in your lab, you need better salaries for professors and researchers, but talk about what the impact is. Talk about what the impact is on the communities you're serving, in this case, the students and what it means. Or if you're talking about research, instead of talking about research equipment you need, talk about how close your researchers are to a cure for, X, whatever they're working on. And that might resonate. I think the mistake nonprofits also make is they're good at telling stories. They probably tell many stories about themselves. Look at the good we're doing. Look how great and passionate our people are. And certainly you should share that. But the stories really need to be both about the impact to the communities you serve. But I think in the case of business partnerships, they know that. I mean, if you've got a nonprofit that's working to end homelessness in Los Angeles, a business knows the stories they're going to tell on impact. It's either going to be a heart-wrenching story about how many families are out, out on the streets, or it's going to be a positive story about look at who we've helped get housed and get services. But what they need to hear are stories about how your partnership has helped other businesses and the community and social enterprises thrive and how that whole ecosystem is being built. That's what's going to resonate with corporations. On the corporation side, listen, we know it. There's a lot of businesses that treat nonprofits just like any other vendor. It's a line on a ledger donation, and they've got to get away from that and get into the mindset of how do we build a social impact program together that benefits both parties, and then how do what I don't see a lot of, other than a press release and things like that, the business themselves need to do a lot more storytelling about, again, how they're working with nonprofits in the communities to push forward social good and lift up the whole sector, lift up the whole community by telling those stories, because I think they're going to have a lot more impact coming from these businesses that just usually have much further reach. So, I think there can be better storytelling on both sides to lift up the whole partnership. And again, lead with value, not need.
How important is it for um, the there to be a kind of direct correlation, such as I talked about before, the Island Harvest and Alero, where you break it down into tangible things like I sell a crate of food, a crate of gloves. I'm sorry, I make a donation of a meal. Meal is tangible. I can understand a meal. My staff can understand a meal, a book or whatever. I can understand those things. When you're talking about mental health or some of these other things where they're maybe a little bit more nebulous, how important is it to kind of equate what the nonprofit and the for-profit are doing together into tangible, understandable components?
I mean, it helps when it's understandable, but I don't think it has to be. I volunteer at an animal shelter here in Long Island, on the dog side. And, yeah, we have partnerships with Petco. That makes sense, right? That's an easy one. They donate money and some good PR. We do events there. But we've also now got something coming up I should know which one, but it's one of the one of the hot wing places that they're going to have a couple of days where a percentage of their sales goes to us. I mean, and there's no correlation there between hot wings and dogs that I know. But so it's good. And it's funny. I happened to see in the corner of my eye in the chat, somebody asked about how can a nonprofit pitch employee engagement and retention ROI if we don't have volunteer opportunities. And I would say you get creative, because here's the deal. Every business has a finance department, has an HR department, has an IT department, right? And so depending on the communities you serve, things like financial literacy programs, things like, from an HR department, job preparation, resumes, interviewing skills, from an IT department, computer skills. And if it doesn't work with the communities you serve, for example, if you're, an animal nonprofit or environmental nonprofit, what about for the nonprofit itself? Could they help with financial modeling? Could they help with, certain employee motivation? So, I think even in volunteering, we tend to say volunteers go somewhere and do something for the day. Well, there's peer-to-peer fundraising, there's skills-based volunteering. So I think it's broaden the perception of what a partnership could look like. So, getting back to your original question, is it nice if there's a perfect match that makes sense in people's minds? Absolutely. But I don't think it has to be that way. You can get kind of creative.
one of the things that I like about the partnerships is kind of creating more of a longer term relationship as opposed to that one-off component of things. I know you mentioned the one of the wing places and the dogs, and that for a couple of days they're going to give a portion of their proceeds. I find that a lot of times, businesses have short attention spans, so they'll do something for a short period of time and then it stops. You know, what I'd love to see is more of those interlocked, built right into the DNA relationships that kind of get created. How do you kind of create those types of relationships as opposed to the one-offs?
Yeah, I think that's critical. If you look at how so many nonprofits, especially smaller ones, are struggling with sustainability, I think for a small nonprofit, a true long-term partnership with one business could build a foundation that they could then build on top of with their individual donors and some of the other things they do that could, really help them sustain for years and years. And I think you build that by identifying, where that value matches, and you start with one, but you build out a program that's going to keep increasing that. So again, we may focus on one thing today, but right at the beginning, don't just wing it. Don't just say, all right, let's do this, and then we'll see what happens. Because you're right, people change, they lose interest, people come and go, and then all of a sudden it no longer has any momentum, and you had a nice one event and you made some money, but it became a one-off. But if you build it like a real partnership, again, I think back to my corporate days, when I was at Canon, we were building partnerships with other companies where we co-sold and co-marketed. Those were partnerships that took a year in the making, and they weren't like one-off things where we're just going after one account together. We built up a whole thing. And that's what you got to do in this part of the business. Nonprofits and a business need to sit down and put together a multifaceted, multi-year plan that's going to expand into different areas as it grows. There's certain checkpoints and milestones to make sure it's working. And maybe there's a couple of decision trees that says, if this happens, we're going to go in one direction. If this happens, we're going to go in another. And you lay that out into a multi-year plan, and then just keep following up and keep publicizing it and keep people involved. And I think if you lay it out like that in front, it has a much better chance of continuing for years versus, just falling off of somebody's radar.
Yeah, and as you said, it's something that both sides need to work on. It's not
Correct.
something that, it's just I'm going to do it or you're going to do it or whatever. Both sides need to really work on it. So, so when we talk about, one of the big things in the nonprofit world is the whole aspect of storytelling, right? And if you're effective at storytelling, you kind of do a good job there. You typically get better results. So, what role does storytelling play in building and sustaining these types of partnerships?
Huge, huge. I'm a big proponent of storytelling, and I like the fact that it's important in the nonprofit world. To me, and I've said this several times, it's emotion that drives action, right? We don't take action based on data. You need data. Data drives trust, it drives verification. And people smarter than me have made the comment, what you really need is data wrapped in a good story. And I agree with that because that's what's going to get people to act. But one of the decisions that has to be made around storytelling, and I touched on this, is who's the hero of the story? What story are you telling? If you're a nonprofit, you can tell a lot of different stories. And again, I don't think it should be so inward focused. I think it should be focused on the value you could bring with other parties, in terms of businesses, communities, social enterprises, whatever it is. And from the business standpoint, those stories got to be bigger than, look at us, we donated $250,000 to March of Dimes, in an emergency. Look how great we are. Of course you should get PR for that, but I'd rather see, look what we've built over the last couple of years with this nonprofit organization, these communities, this cause, these people, and really tell those stories because I just think the more you do that, the more it just lifts up basically corporate philanthropy as a whole and gets other businesses to take note. And then it just keeps feeding, it just keeps feeding the beast and it keeps growing. So I think stories are important. I think maybe there needs to be adjustment in how the stories are told from both sides.
So, from a storytelling perspective, I guess one of the things that nonprofits tend to lead with is, as you said, is that kind of the emotional component of things
Right.
and looking at things from an emotional perspective. And you're saying that maybe they need to shift it a little bit more from that emotional component of things to maybe a bit more of a business component of things, because that's the language that businesses are speaking. So that story should then kind of transition out.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, yeah, you want the emotion in there because I think that maybe is that you're still dealing with individuals within that corporation, right? You're still dealing, so that, they do have hearts and they do have emotions. So you do want to hit that. But I do think it's a business story. Like when I was heading up sales, that's what we did when we had a prospect, a top prospect. What do we want to do? We want to tell them the story of what value they're going to get by partnering with us, by becoming a client. What's it going to mean to them? What's it going to look like in 3 years? How is their life going to get better? And I think that's the same story nonprofits want to take to businesses. How is their life going to get better? How are they going to meet their goals quicker, better, faster?
So looking ahead, what trends are you most excited about in the space where business meets mission?
Oh, that's a great question, Ken. And let me start it by saying I am excited about the whole social impact space. I know we talked a lot about things today that need to be fixed, but I do think there's a lot of trends and a lot of good signs that we're heading in the right directions. I'll give you three real quick. Number one, I talked about it earlier. I love the rise of social enterprises. I just think they're such a wonderful model that takes mission first but focuses on for profit and they have the ability to get very creative and innovative, and a lot of them are using technology and apps to drive whatever cause it is they're for. And they're growing, they're doing well. So I think that model is very good. Nonprofits can't follow that model, but they can partner with social enterprises
Well,
and
they
business.
they they, they kind of can. They can create a for-profit business associated with
Yeah,
their
you
nonprofit
could have two different
organization.
sides
We've
of it. Yeah.
seen we've seen a lot in the developmentally disabled space where that's one of the hardest populations to find jobs. So they've created business models to enable employment of individuals with developmental
So they
disabilities.
basically an employment agency for those individuals along with being a
Or
nonprofit.
specific jobs, whether it be
Yeah.
custodial services or retail or whatever, that allows for them to be employed.
Yeah, and most of the social enterprises I've talked to have a nonprofit component. So they've got a piece that's just based on fundraising to contribute to the cause, but then they're also
Mhm.
doing this for-profit stuff to drive change as well. So I think the rise of social enterprises is wonderful. We talked earlier about the generational differences. I think the millennials and Gen Zs get a bad rap sometimes, and people are like, oh, they got their head in the clouds. I'm like, good, keep your head in the clouds, don't let anybody drag you down, keep pushing for social change and hold businesses, nonprofits, institutions, people, hold them accountable for doing it authentically and not just putting kind of a marketing and PR spin of it. And the other thing is, it's no longer the future. A lot of them are starting to ascend into leadership positions and they're going to make those cultural changes themselves. And I think, as the father of one of each, one millennial daughter and one Gen Z daughter, I'm excited about what they're going to bring to the future. And then the last thing I touched on earlier was AI. I just think it's a game changer. It's not going to solve all your problems, and I know there's some, negatives associated with it, but for small and mid-sized nonprofits, the ability to level the playing field, to have access to time-saving, initiatives and heavy research and insights, and using those two things to make better connections, I think is a game changer.
So from an innovation perspective and looking at the biggest opportunities for innovation, are you saying AI is kind of that, or are there other innovations that you see happening over the next few years?
I think you have AI, but I've also noticed like some really either forward-thinking nonprofits or, like I said, social enterprises are diving into, creating apps that work for the communities they serve. I mean, one of them I'm working with is focused on homelessness, and they're developing technology that's going to be an app where the homeless would have access to, any services they need, and then the nonprofits could sign up to be on the app so that they could be recognized as a resource for people, who found themselves in a homeless situation. So I think the ability to, AI has also helped with that because the ability to code and create an app has gotten a lot easier. But I think just any kind of innovation like that is really, really exciting going forward. Plus, it's going to resonate with the younger generations.
And then what's one piece of advice you'd give to nonprofits or businesses just starting to kind of explore this space?
I think no, don't be scared. I see almost fear of like corporate partnerships because they think, the corporation is going to dictate or the business is going to dictate exactly what they do and they're going to take over and they're going to push things in a way that goes away from the mission. So I think don't be scared and overall. in the sector, don't look at sustainability as doing more with less. That's always the mindset. And sometimes on the business side it is too. How do we tighten our belts? How do we cut costs? How do we do more with less? But to me, sustainability should be about doing doing different with, having the courage, having clarity, and mostly being creative. There's so many different ways that you can look at driving motivation and funding, in creative ways if you put your mind to it. And I think, and don't try to do 400 of them. Just find one right now and then build off of that.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time. So thank you for joining us for this edition of Cerini Connection. We hope today's conversation sparked new ideas and offered practical strategies for building stronger, more impactful partnerships between nonprofits and businesses. As we've heard, aligning mission with market isn't just possible, it's powerful. A big thank you to Dan. We appreciate you for sharing your insights and all that you've been bringing and part of this important dialogue. Let's continue to lead with purpose, think collaboratively, and drive change that benefits our organizations and our communities. Until next time, stay connected and stay committed to making a difference. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Dan. Totally
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.